Everybody is familiar with the phrase drill baby drill, right? But there are three other babies we got to talk about. We got to talk about map baby map, right? Mine baby mine and build baby build. Can you explain how these four concepts go together in terms of getting that stuff out of these federal lands and resources onto the balance sheet, into the revenue stream for the country?
Well, I'll start with drill baby drill. When we have public and federal lands, there's required by law the auctions, and the federal government is required to hold an auction so private sector people can bid and say, hey, there's an area of acreage that is now eligible to be bid on for mineral development, let's say oil and gas. And those auctions happen, the private sector companies come in, they bid on that, and when they win the bid, they write a check up front to the Treasury. Boom, dollars come in. I mean, I think in the last weeks of Trump's first administration, just the state of New Mexico pulled in $900 million from lease sales, the state, and then the federal government gets a big chunk of that. So these are really significant things. In North Dakota, during my time as governor, which just ended on December 15th, we were engaged in a lawsuit the entire Biden term because the federal government wasn't holding leases that they were required by law to hold. I mean, every president since Harry Truman had held the quarterly lease sales. And so after 2 years of foot dragging, we finally said, we got to take him to court. We went to court, we fought for 2 years, we won, and the federal judge said to the Biden administration, the law says you must hold lease sales, so you need to hold the lease sales. And the Biden administration decided to appeal. It was just black and white. They're breaking the law and then they appeal. So it's like, this is the frustration that I had as a governor in a resource state where we had the cleanest air, the cleanest water, and the best soil health, and we were producing things, and we wanted to send checks to the Treasury. If you allow us to develop, we will send you a check. And with horizontal drilling in North Dakota, as it is now, the technology that's happening in the whole world, I mean, everybody thinks fracking is a horrible, horrible word. I mean, it is. Just when you hear that word, think of like something that's even more amazing than the latest technology. The Bakken is, we were the nation in 2007, which was on our path to becoming the most dependent on oil and gas imports. We were a net importer of oil and gas. Today, we're the largest producer in the world, and it all came from a technological revolution called the shale revolution. This is not the oil and gas industry. It's not like, if you really have a history of film, it's not like some Rock Hudson movie from the 50s where there's just black and white movie, there's oil spewing anyway. If you're younger, it's not Daniel Day-Lewis, There Will Be Blood, where there's just like oil everywhere. I was in my first year as governor, and I'm in a drill shack in the Bakken trying to understand how a 30-foot strip, 10,000 feet underground, could be developed into a liquid. I mean, a strip that is hard as the streets that you're driving on here, actually harder. They go down 2 miles, they turn a corner, and they go 2 miles, and they stay in a 30-foot strip. At 10,000 feet underground, that's a third of 1% tolerance, and they stay in it for 2 miles. And I'm like, how do you possibly do it? And a 25-year-old kid in a white lab coat surrounded by computers in a place that is spotless, and there's not a drop of oil anywhere on the entire site, says, well, sir, if your house was 2 miles down and 2 miles over, I could drill a lockout on the front door. And then last year in North Dakota, 75% of the permits were 3-mile laterals, 2 miles down, 3 miles over. So now I got a piece of federal land. Over here on private land, I go down, I don't touch a leaf, I don't touch a frog, a bird, anything. And I send the federal government a check, and they weren't letting us do that. So part of why I jumped into this whole national thing was we just had to get some common sense back to what we're doing. So the drill baby drill is not like, they're gonna end up with drilling rigs surrounding Old Faithful. No, again, remember, 700 million acres of federal land. I mean, something like 7% of that is national parks. We can protect any acre, we can make bigger parks, we can do all that, and we can do both. This is a time of abundance, so we have to get going again. And people say, oh, but Secretary Burgum, didn't you just say that we've got record output? Isn't this contrary? Well, the reason we've got record output today is not because of anything what the Biden administration did. It's in spite of what they did. The reason why we have high output today is because lease sales were being held right up through the 4 years of President Trump. We are headed towards a time when we're going to have a decline potentially because no lease sales were being held. And it takes a while for the private sector to develop that. So when President Trump summarized this beautifully in 3 words, drill baby drill, we got to do all the things, the permitting, we got to get back in the game, we got to encourage private sector capital to come to our country versus go to overseas projects, to come back here to make sure we do that, and we have to get the regulations out of the way so this industry can keep innovating. On the map, baby map, U.S. Geologic Survey is part of Interior. Their job is to go map these enormous resources we have onshore, offshore, and specifically subsurface. And if people don't think that's important, I would encourage people to read this great book that came out in the early 2000s called The Map That Changed the World. And it was a story about this aspiring geologist cartographer in England, Scotland, and Wales, who actually personally, between 1800 and 1815, went around and mapped the whole country, all the subsurface acres. And people and here's where the coal is, here's where all the resources are. That led to this century of the UK and Britain becoming a global power. They revolutionized transportation. They had the ability to move heavy objects from A to B with steam trains powered by coal. They could do manufacturing someplace that wasn't next to a river where you needed water power. I mean, it transformed everything. They became the biggest shipbuilder. They projected power all over the world because of one guy and his map. And then later in the 1800s, then Interior, which was formed in 1849, and then later, hey, we should be doing that in the U.S. U.S. Geologic Survey was created. Did that in many of these executive orders and things that we're seeing where we're taking surface land or others off the map, completely extending beyond the original language in the Antiquities Act to create massive national monuments, which I think courts will find that some of those have gone way beyond the law. In the fine print it says, oh, you can't even do any mapping. I mean, there was a conscious effort to hide the resources that the American public owns in all these public lands and actually sort of put USGS out of business. So we've got to get back to the mapping business, and that's key because that relates to mine, baby, mine, because we've killed the mining industry in our country over the last 30 years. Just check the number of college graduates we have, the programs that are shutting down, and then what did we do? We outsourced our environmental angst by saying, oh, we'll just buy them all from China. And then China, who does open pit mining, destroys countries like Indonesia, the Democratic Republic of Congo. They use child labor, they use prisoners, they use forced labor. They don't have an EPA, and they don't do any of that. And then they flood the market with low-cost minerals anytime we try to do any here, and then they crush U.S. entrepreneurs that are trying to get in. Meanwhile, so then we wake up and we say, wow, we just had a policy where we were going to subsidize EV vehicles with batteries that came from China when China controls 85% of the mineral refinery, and we're going to tax all of you to create subsidies so that we can buy minerals from them. And now that we're in we've been in a Cold War, we've been in a cyber war with them, we're in a cyber war with them every day, but they're saying, I mean, it's on page 18, but we're going to stop shipping gallium and germanium to the US. I mean, they have export controls, and you take the top 20 minerals we need for national defense, for technology, for your cell phones, and we are almost completely reliant on foreign sources, many of those China. So I mean, one of the things that the NEDC is focused on is how do we catch up? I mean, we're in a precarious position when we have just put ourselves in an enormous position of dependence on adversaries or potential adversaries for the critical minerals. So map baby mac, mine baby mine, and then the third one is build baby build, is we've got to start building. We've got to build power generation, we've got to build more base load power. We got dangerously out of whack between intermittent, unreliable, expensive versus the affordable, low-cost base load. That endangers our whole grid. So that was those are the sort of the four babies. It's the first time I've heard of all that, but I love that.
That's how we refer to it. It's the four babies, right?
We need to name them now. We come up with